Ever wonder why some people take communion so seriously and call it the Eucharist? Well, that's what Joseph and I are going to tackle for the next couple weeks, diving into church history, scripture, and our own personal experiences with communion. Alright, here we go.
We're here with Tarzan.
Howdy.
Of the, he's a New Yorker, from what I recall.
Yep, upstate New York.
Upstate. Be a little more specific and talk about how you got here.
Well, when I say upstate, you can call it kind of Western New York as well. Originally, I'm from Rochester, and I moved here because I met a girl. And
classic.
Yeah, a girl who works in the medical field, and New York doesn't like to accept people's stuff. She'll kill me if I don't mention that when I say medical field, I mean social work. But it's the same license, and New York doesn't accept it, so it was easier for me as an audio guy to move here.
Okay, cool. That makes sense. Yeah, I met you at church one time. I can't even remember how we just kind of started talking to each other in the foyer or something like that.
You were talking. I was standing waiting for my then girlfriend because I had moved here. I hadn't proposed yet. That would be 2 months into living here.
Yeah.
But I was standing waiting for her, and I don't know. I guess you might have sensed something. You just walked up and stood next to me. And after a brief conversation, you mentioned what's it called? You mentioned a pilgrimage you were on.
Yeah.
And how you loved spirited Catholics.
Yes,
I said,
quote, spirit-filled Catholics, which is such a refreshing thing. Oh yeah, that's it too, because you started talking about your faith, and I appreciate well-read Catholics so much, because in the Protestant world, Catholics get a bad rap for not knowing their Bible or not knowing their history. And there's kind of like a lackadaisical assumption among a Protestant about Catholics. They, see it as like Easter, Christmas, religious. We do this because this is our family's tradition, but I'm not into it.
Simply because it's tradition.
Yeah.
And so a lot of Protestants just think it's man-made tradition, and the Catholics that most Protestants meet, because the Americas are filled with mainly Protestants, and then the Catholics that are here, you'll run into the kinds like me. But for the most part, are the Christmas and Easter Catholics.
Yes.
Just we fulfill our Christmas and Easter, and that's it.
That's right. And that's kind of like, I grew up Catholic, and I hadn't had much experience with it. After getting out of high school, I was Protestant, I would say, from maybe about being, 9-10 years old until about, I was like a teenager, I think, when I abandoned religion for a portion of time. But so I was more exposed to the Protestant lifestyle. I was just raised in Catholicism. So yeah, when I went on that pilgrimage, I went to Kansas and walked 60 miles for 4 days with a bunch of really devout Catholics. It changed my perspective and really put a soft spot in my heart for Catholicism. And I think I reinvented my perspective of it, because I think that a lot of my opinions on Catholicism were just kind of like reflections of my mom's, because she adopted Protestantism so deeply, non-denominational, that it just felt like it fulfilled so much more for her than what Catholicism ever did.
Yeah. I will say this. I have my own podcast, kind of YouTube channel show. And right now the series going on is about ecumenism, meaning the discussion between different Christian churches.
Yeah. Ecumenism?
Ecumenism, yes.
Ecumenism.
E-C.
Yeah.
U. M-E-N-I-S-M. Ecumenism.
I'm gonna check you on that retroactively. It's gonna be good.
I can type it and I can spell it when I'm writing. Maybe I got the spelling wrong, but that is what the job.
That's what it's called. It has a name because that's something I feel pretty drawn to in my spirit is this conversation between the sects.
The different Christian churches.
Mhm.
What was the point of that? I remember the point. I was just trying to get back to it mentally. Oh yes, your mother so easily accepted Protestantism, non-denominational Baptist, and it seemed like it fulfilled more for her. That is it's one thing that I'd like to thank Protestantism for. It's kind of like the net. Like we're all walking on a tightrope. These priester, not really well catechized Catholics, they're all on a tightrope. And one thing's gonna knock them over. And Protestantism, at least in the Americas, and I guess Western European, has been like a net to catch them, make sure that they don't fall all the way to being a nun, N-O-N-E,
Yeah.
not N-U-N.
Yeah.
I guess if your mom became a nun, that'd be kind of weird. You have, I assume, still a husband and a child, so
Yeah, no, left
I don't
everything.
exactly know how. Just left everything for the Abbey.
Changed her
became a
name
nun.
for the habit.
Yeah. N-O-N-E, a nun. Yeah. So I will say that's a good thing about having something like this.
Yeah. In having that conversation about, say it again, eucharism, ecumenism. Thank you. You start to think about where are the differences? Like, why is it that we do have different groups? And one that I'm always drawn to is obviously like the Eucharist. I think that's like one of the main differences between your Protestant and maybe more traditional Orthodox Catholic belief
I would say
systems.
the difference between low church and high church for the most part.
What do you mean by that? Low church and high church?
So low church would be like what you're used to at your ecclesial community is what the Catholic Church refers to non-Catholic or the Orthodox churches. It's an ecclesial community. What you're used to, you have a band up on stage and then the pastor comes out and speaks for 20 to 40 minutes, longer if it's Pentecostal.
Set up a lot like a lecture that's preceded by a musical worship session.
Yeah. So that is usually referred to as low church because a high church has a more sacramental view. We're thinking like Anglican, Episcopalian, Lutheran, obviously Catholic and Orthodox. The difference between low church and high church tends to be the view of the Eucharist.
Yeah.
That tends to be because for Catholicism and Orthodoxy, and I'm sure for the rest of high church Protestantism, the Eucharist in some form or another is the source and summit of our faith.
Yeah.
Thing that ties everything together.
Right. And I find it so interesting that like it's a very like, fantastic and mysterious idea, the Eucharist. I think that it's odd to me that within the Protestant church that it's so like willingly disregarded as
just a symbol.
Yeah, as just a symbol. And because like we're as a faith, there's so much as a belief system, there's so much taken at face value of faith. Like the most like unbelievable circumstances he died and rose again, beat death. This is incredible. Healed people, like actually the Son of God. These things are like really big mental hurdles to get past, like when you're thinking about having faith in something.
And then it seems like for Protestantism, you can accept all of that, but not this is my body and my blood.
Yeah.
And then you're just like,
so it needs, I think.
You mean symbol?
Yeah.
What's it called? A representation?
Yeah.
No, he didn't say those words.
So that's the question, I guess. So within Catholicism, for like those of that aren't familiar with what we're referring to as like the Eucharist and why we're speaking of it as that instead of like just calling it bread and
Holy
wine
Communion.
or Holy Communion or something along those lines, like it's the very specific idea that the priest has spiritual authority and lineage to transubstantiate or to pray over the wafer and the wine to cause it to become the flesh and blood of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, they have the ability to consecrate the bread and wine into becoming the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and this is very important within the Catholic Church. This is cornerstone belief, and it's gone unquestioned for a very long time. It was just kind of
100 years before anybody questioned it. And even then, the most people questioned it was, does this mean like it's entirely Jesus? Or like in the case of Lutherans, is this the bread and wine, but covered physically with like kind of like dipping it in
which are
body and blood?
Which are like nitty gritty questions that I don't think are relevant because the hurdle is already big enough, like to start. So like that's why I think that's key in. I think one of the things that should be put to rest between Protestants and like traditional Catholics or Orthodox. So I had a couple questions that I really wrote down, and that was like one of the beginnings was, so it's like literal flesh and blood, and that is established, and I think that I wonder like why, you have the intentions of maintaining tradition, and I think that this is another thing that is like a problem between like the perception of Catholics to Protestants is like the intentions behind maintaining certain traditions. And I think that this comes back to it, and this is like where I'm curious. When did that become kind of essential to from the Last Supper? You had Jesus doing the ceremony. This is my body. This is my blood. So when did that become a cornerstone of the way, the people that were practicing the way?
Okay,
you know what I mean? Am I asking that?
You're asking when do we
coherently?
see it first?
When did they start doing it in a structured manner of like within our congregation of our weekly get together? We're going to break bread and drink blood, like, because the early church, I'm assuming, looked something like Bible studies at first.
So initially, the Jewish way of worship was liturgy, similar to Catholics and Orthodox. So if we look at Judaism, this is important to your question. What you see is a way of worship, a liturgy.
Yeah. When you say liturgy, what do you mean by that?
So, sorry, yes. Liturgy literally means the work of God. It is a structured form of worship.
Okay.
That's what liturgy is.
And I'm just going to stop you real quick. What do you think the function of a liturgy is? Like, why is there a structured form of worship?
Right worship for the Lord. And that is just simple answer why there is liturgy, why it's important. And you see it in the Old Testament.
Well, because and if you don't have a right way of doing it, it gets weird over time.
Yes.
Things devolve into weirdness if they're not structured.
Yes. I would also argue that, what you're now currently used to as church is a weird thing compared to how Christians worship.
Yeah, and I think that
for forever.
I think the way that you approach it is, I think, wholesome and recognizing the pros and the cons. I think that like going to both is honorable, and it's something that like I am striving for. like more consistently.
I mean, I even said in the episode of my podcast that comes out on Friday, I literally said that my favorite part of Protestant worship is the fact that it's like a lecture, and
Yeah.
I love learning.
Yeah, exactly.
And
That's my favorite part about
particularly-
it too. Yeah.
Particularly the pastor at our Protestant ecclesial community
Yeah.
church.
He.
But
But yeah. Well,
we
so
don't want to get too far off.
Yeah, no,
tangent
no.
here. Let's go back to liturgy and
yeah. So yeah,
your
liturgy.
question.
You were
Your
talking
initial
about how like the
When did this become a cornerstone? And I had to bring up liturgy for it
the Judaism. Yeah, it's similar. It's very similar to Mass.
because they have the bread of the presence as part of their liturgy, and the bread of the presence gets its this stuff from the manna. What is this? Literally, what that means, right? And you see that, and so I would say it's pretty immediate, as since we kind of view the Last Supper as that's where the Mass goes.
Yeah.
When we have the words of consecration,
Well,
it is the
and
Last Supper.
and the people that were establishing the church were there, and he very clearly said, "Do this in remembrance of me." He like, and I think that that's something that like I always found interesting about the Last Supper is that it follows the it is the
Jewish Passover.
yeah the what's the word for that it's escaping me right now. Me and Maria celebrated it last year, and it was really fun. The Seder meal.
Yes.
Seder. So that was in the symbology, and I don't really remember it to talk about it like knowledgeably, but there's the cups, and there's the
4 cups.
the 4 cups, exactly, and all of this was like, and I think that is a huge problem with like people's understanding of like how important some of these events were and how they parallel Judaism. I think that people like understood the practice of Judaism, like you said, the structure of it. If you went and sat Shabbat one time, you would understand like
Where Catholics get there.
Yeah.
Where Catholics and Orthodox get there.
structure.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing. It's very similar. There's standing, call, and response. You're reading from the book. There's things that you do the same every single time.
We just have more books than them, so we have
Yeah. And I think it worth mentioning if I'm making some sort of a case to somebody, and like really at this point, it's more trying to see where the origins are on these concepts of like Eucharist, and but I think that that's one thing that like maybe goes without saying too often, is that there are these ceremonies, and like for instance the Latin Mass, it existed that way in order to preserve something, to make sure that it was the same across the world and across time. And I think a lot of times it's the intentions are misconstrued as trying to gatekeep certain things and spiritually gatekeep from the congregation away from Jesus, or that spiritual connection between the Holy Spirit and the individuals in the congregation. And I think that goes along here with the Eucharist, and it's saying that within the Catholic Church is the only place that that this can happen, and there's like an exclusivity to it. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I gather when we talk about this, it's intentions to preserve, not to exclude.
Yeah. I would say that it's exclusive, right? But not in the way like it excludes people, but like it's an exclusive club. Christianity, like in general. What I mean, like even when I was a Protestant, right? Still, I was like, Christianity is an exclusive club, right? We do have rules, and we have borders, and to not be with those rules or borders excludes you only because you exclude yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And so what we're doing is we're preserving the truth. We're preserving worship. And so I would just say that, right? Because that's what we're doing. We're preserving right worship.
So yeah, when I saw a couple of those videos that you sent me, there was some talk within 300 years or so of Jesus's death, of the divinity of the Eucharist. So that that concept, what is the spiritual function that Protestants are missing out on by not believing that communion is as miraculous as it is?
You're not receiving Jesus. Like, I don't know how else to put that, right? Because we believe it's the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ every Eucharist. Whether it's the Missal according to 1962, the Latin Mass, the Novus Ordo, or current form, the English, the Personal Ordinary, which I go to, my favorite form of the Mass, or any of the 20-something Eastern Catholic and Orthodox churches. Right? We believe it's the truly body, blood, soul, and divinity every time. And you can see, you said in the video that first 300 years, but you say that, and it's almost sounds like it feels a bit too far until you realize who the people are speaking. Who are the people that are speaking? Like, for instance, right, you talk about Ignatius, he's in the 100s. St. Ignatius, who was a student of John, the one who wrote the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and so this is a belief held from the apostles that so it's not so far removed. Yeah.
And so to be able to be like, look, this is what we believe, the first apostles, the first disciples said this, taught. And you see that, right? Because people will be like, okay, well, what if they just got it wrong? Well, you see that. You see when people get it wrong, right? Because other students, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he got it wrong. He got something wrong, and he was called out.
Yeah.
By Ignatius.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we were taught this. What are you doing, man?
All right, guys, you know the deal. I'm going to leave you off there for next week's episode to continue where we left off. Thank you for coming to this episode. God bless.